flooded the earth for 150 days. But God remembered Noah, and for all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark. And he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. Now the springs of the deep and the floodgates of the heavens had been closed, and the rain had stopped falling from the sky. The water receded steadily from the earth. At the end of the 150 days, the water had gone down. And on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. After 40 days, Noah opened the window he had made in the ark and sent out a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove could find no place to set its feet, because it was water over all the surface of the earth. So it returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and took the dove and brought it back to himself in the ark. He waited 7 more days and again sent out the dove from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there on its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth, and he waited 7 more days and sent the dove out again, but this time it did not return. By the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. Noah then removed the covering from the ark and saw that the surface of the ground was dry. By the 27th day of the 2nd month, the earth was completely dry. Then God said to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so that they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number upon it." So Noah came out, together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives. All the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground, and all the birds, everything that moves on the earth, came out of the ark, one kind after another. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking something of all of the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease." Here is the first reading. Our second reading this morning is from Mark's Gospel, chapter 2, starting at verse 18. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. Some people came and asked Jesus, "How is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not?" Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, he pours new wine into new wineskins." One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, Look, what are they it's unlawful to be done on the Sabbath? He answered, Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is the Lord, even of the Sabbath. Here ends the second reading.
Lent is traditionally a time of sober reflection. And the idea of fasting in Lent, giving up something, is not to deprive yourself, but to help you focus. The idea is that whenever you would ordinarily eat that particular thing, it's a regular part of your diet, and you don't through Lent. Instead, that becomes a time of focus on your spiritual well-being. The rule serves the purpose rather than the purpose serving the rule. Well, in our tradition, we've not been real careful following those dietary observances. We have a tendency to take the stuff that we enjoy doing and leave the stuff that we don't. And that's probably okay. We start our Lenten season with a pancake supper. And it's more about getting together and enjoying some pancakes and sausage. It's not about using up all of the rising agents and the fats in our pantries. Because you got to get it all cleaned out so you get all new. Dietary rules are important to a lot of us. I know I have a lot of dietary rules. I don't eat this because it can cause me to have that kind of a reaction, and I don't eat that because that can cause another. This one can do this and that one can do that. And it's always around those kind of things. But for a lot of religious groups, the rules are quite a bit more arbitrary. That certain religious groups just do not eat pork. It is considered an unclean animal from their perspective. Historically, it probably had to do with keeping people in closed camp conditions from getting sick from trichinosis. Well, our pork is raised in such clean environments comparatively that the risk of trichinosis is greatly reduced. And of course, our meat inspection, refrigeration, cooking practices, all of that kind of mitigates that risk. And yet, even with all those modern developments, those religious groups still do not eat pork. The controversy that Jesus was having was around what is the purpose of the rules of society. Now, he wasn't talking about Ten Commandment kind of things. He was, in this controversy, about those kind of secondary and tertiary rules of the society. And it's interesting for us to look at the groups that get drawn out. That Mark was in controversy with those groups. They had a vision of salvation that depended on certain rules. The two groups that we hear listed here are the disciples of the Pharisees, in other words, those who follow the Pharisaic tradition. They believed that salvation of Israel would come by obeying the law, and that the problems that Israel faced were because people were not obeying the law. Law observance, religious observance were the same thing, and and were seen as the salvation of the people. If you break one rule, well, what's to say you break this one, that one, and next thing you know, you're in total chaos. And they believed that that's what was going wrong with Israel. People were not following the rules and invited the oppression of Rome to come in. Rome was really big on rules. Very strict. The other group, John's disciples, are also called out. They were a group that we hear of in history called the Essenes. And they lived an incredibly deprived kind of lifestyle. That they lived in the wilderness. They did not live in towns or in houses. They lived in the caves. They only ate things that they could forage naturally. They did not cultivate. They did not herd. It was all foraging that they lived on. They relied entirely on what nature provided. Kind of an extreme lifestyle. We hear about John coming from the wilderness and eating locusts and wild honey. And that was it was like whatever you could forage, that's what you ate. No cultivation. They were sure that the end of humanity was imminent. And they were survivalists. We still see this every once in a while. Not so much in the last 15 or 20 years, but I remember as a kid, there was all sorts of people that were building bunkers under their houses, that they were going to survive the nuclear holocaust and all of that kind of stuff. Survivalists were a big thing. We had a big controversy just this past year where a group of survivalists took over a national park in the U.S. and the Army came in and displaced them, and they were going to stay there and live off the land as everything kind of went crazy. There tends to be a little bit of an association between survivalist behavior and a conviction that the end of the world is nigh. Those seem to connect somehow. So those are the two groups that Mark calls out. Extreme kinds of adherence to rules. The one group may be very arbitrary. The other had a long history developed through the culture of worship. You got to remember that in the temple in Israel at this time, they were still practicing animal sacrifices. And the story from Noah was about the beginning of that. It was about this need to kill animals in such a particular way and burn them in order to appease an angry God. Now this was common to a lot of ancient religions, that they believed that sacrifice of animals, and in some cultures even people, and as you get further along through the Old Testament, you'll see that the progenitors of Israel almost went that way, but pulled back at the last minute. Almost thought it was necessary to kill a human as a sacrifice to an angry God. Well, why was it so important for Mark to draw this line so early in his story about Jesus? He's still setting everything up at this point. It's early in the gospel narrative, and he's trying to kind of set the stage for what's going to happen. So that when it gets to the climax of the story, everybody has been following along and knows what Mark has laid down. This is why it happened. So he's setting the stage, and he is drawing this line in the sand, as it were, in the narrative anyway, between other ways of encountering God and the way that Jesus is introduced. Now, Jesus always is careful to say he's talking about the same God that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were talking about. But he says, you're missing the point when you think about God as being an angry, vengeful God. Whenever you go that way, you are misrepresenting the Creator of the universe. And that gets their back up. It's kind of saying to them that your practices are not helping people to come to know who God is. And they don't like it. And that's really important later on in the narrative to understand that. From this point on, in Mark's narrative, we'll start to see Mark revealing more and more what Jesus' teaching is. As he starts to reveal the nature of God, which is different from that being taught by the religious authorities of the day. It is not so much appeasing an angry God who is bent on destruction of humanity, like in Noah's narrative, but a God who loves us and wants to be in relationship with us. It's like going back earlier in Genesis to when God was talking about creating humanity to be in fellowship with God, rather than this destructive, angry, fed-up God that we hear about with Noah. Now, I know we've sanitized the Noah account right down to it becomes a thing you put on the walls in your child's nursery, haven't we? You know, it's one of those cute stories of all the animals in the ark, and it's very accessible that way to children. But let's not lose sight of what the real underlying narrative there is, that God was so pissed off at people that he wiped them all out. And Jesus wants to stand in stark contrast to that. That's why this line is drawn. It's to say, I will have no part of it, because it gives a false understanding of who God is. The strange thing is that we live in a world where an awful lot of people completely miss this little narrative in the gospel passage somehow. And they think that God is about making people adhere to our rules. I remember back in my early days in ministry, just after I was ordained, and this man came into my office and said, I need help, my marriage is falling apart, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, you know, if you'd like to come in and talk about it, well, she won't come in when I come in. And I said, well, will she come in? I can kind of talk to both of you. And he said, I'll ask. He set up an appointment, and the woman came in and sat in my office, and she told me, she said, I am surprised that the roof has not fallen in on me and crushed the life out of me, because I have done everything wrong. And I'm thinking, wow, here's a woman who thinks of God as an angry, judgmental, super villain of the universe who is bent on the destruction of anybody who displeases him. didn't know what to do with it. We met a couple of times. It was apparent that their relationship was doomed. There was no way to repair it that I could see, that they could see. I referred them to a marriage therapist, suggesting that that might be a better help than what I could do for them. But quite clearly, any interaction I had with her was fraught with fear. And that's part of what we deal with as Christians in the world today. We deal with a world outside of the church who sees the church as something dangerous, judgy, and destructive. You don't have to go very far to find someone who will blame the church for all manner of atrocities against humanity that have been done over the centuries. And they would be right. But the church is not God. Just like the Pharisees and the Essenes were not God. And that's part of what Jesus started to bring, is that the religion is not there for people to become enslaved to it. The religion is there to help and support people. It's quite different. Very contrasting kind of a line in the sand. Religious observance. If you are going to observe Lent as a season of fasting, always do it fasting with prayer. Don't just fast. There's no point. Unless you're trying to lose weight. They say, you have to change your diet than just to fast. Fast with prayer. So that it helps you focus. And don't fast on something that you don't eat anyway, because you're not going to get any advantage of the focus. I'm going to give up eating kittens through Lent. Well, I would never eat a kitten anyway. I use something ridiculous, but it could be something that's equally easy to give up. If you're going to do it, do something that's part of your regular diet. I don't know what it is. It would be up to you. But it is about using it as a way to focus your prayer life. Praying doesn't have to be hard. It can be just taking the time and thinking about what God is doing in your life, in the world, about what you're doing in your life and in the world. You don't have to have the right words and the right pattern. You can take home the bulletin today and you can use the prayers that are printed there and just repeat them. You can use something that simple. But use the fasting as a way to help you focus prayer. Not by depriving, but by bringing your attention to it. Reminding. The rule is to help you. We don't tend to observe a lot of rules in our tradition. I know some traditions are really good on rules. They've got lots of them. If you want to really get into it, you can. And some people enjoy following rules as a matter of practice. It helps them progress. And they're certainly beneficial in those cases. So on Tuesday, the ordinary time, the season of Epiphany comes to a close, and we gather together, we have pancake supper, then we start Lent on Wednesday, and the traditional practice was that we take your palm cross from last Palm Sunday, last year, you would burn it. And you would use the ashes and you would inscribe upon your forehead, or a priest or a minister could do it for you, a mark of the cross, which begins the season of Lent, which is a season of careful prayer, with fasting, if it helps. And then on the Sundays, there is release, because each Sunday is not in Lent, or not of Lent. It is in Lent, but not of Lent. And Sundays are little Easters. And the idea is that you don't fast on Sunday. Good day to have a family get together and eat together, enjoy company. But that's kind of the practice of Lent. It's about prayer, and for some, prayer with fasting. Have a good Lent.